All right, so this section is Unit 8. We're going to start with industrialization. So the Industrial Revolution. The overall dates of each of these countries are not super critical. What I do want to make sure you remember is approximate timeline and which ones came first and last in the progression. So the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain around 1750. And the first industry to be industrialized was, of course, the textile industry, the clothing and cloth industry. Big reason why the Industrial Revolution started in Britain: they had a large population, they had the natural resources available, they had nice smooth rivers for transportation, and they'd had some technological developments like the invention of the steam engine to make industrialization possible. Some of the effects that we see: Britain becomes the most powerful Western nation. We do see huge increases in pollution, really poor living conditions, child labor. If you've ever read Charles Dickens, like Oliver Twist, for example, he wrote on these topics extensively. The Industrial Revolution then spread to the continent, to Germany. Also, many similar reasons for Great Britain. They had lots of natural resources like coal as well. It's very similar effects to Great Britain: increased pollution, became more wealthy. We also see an upswing in nationalism in Germany. Remember, Germany had previously been a lot of separate, smaller countries. Eventually, this nationalist movement will lead to Otto von Bismarck unifying Germany. Japan, of course, industrializes through the Meiji Restoration. This takes place around 1900 after Matthew Perry had traveled to Tokyo and opened up Japan to trade again. They had seen they were behind the Western nations, wanted desperately to catch up. So the emperor was restored to power. That's why it's called the Meiji Restoration. Japan modernized, it built up its military, restructured the government, built schools, really started doing things to make it look like more of a Western-style nation. During the Industrial Revolution, there's two new economic ideas that start to develop: capitalism and communism. Capitalism is connected with Adam Smith. This starts developing due to the factories and due to the business policies that the factory owners will put into place. The ideas of capitalism include the free market with private business ownership. And the vocab term you need to remember is laissez-faire economics or laissez-faire capitalism. That's this one right here. The government should stay out of the economy. It shouldn't interfere at all. Karl Marx, on the other hand, writes the Communist Manifesto, largely as a reaction to the capitalist ideas of Adam Smith and the factory owners. And in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx says that the proletariat, the workers, so the factory workers, would eventually rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie or the factory owners. Basically, that eventually the people are going to get fed up with the bad working conditions and do something about it. And for this reason, communism starts to become more appealing to many of the factory workers. All right. Otto von Bismarck, this is number 3. He was originally the Prime Minister of Prussia. This was one of the many smaller German countries. And he used his policy of blood and iron, basically military strength, to unify Germany. That is what he's best known for, unifying Germany. Emperor Meiji was from Japan. He was the Emperor of Japan. And he's responsible for spearheading this modernization and industrialization process of Japan. It's called the Meiji Restoration because the emperor got his power back, and he started industrializing and modernizing in order to catch up with the Western European nations and the United States. Industrialization. Imperialism starts very soon after the Industrial Revolution, and this is because of the Industrial Revolution. Industrialization is what makes the imperialism era possible. Without these new technologies that were developed, like new transportation methods, like the steam engine to put on ships to make them travel faster, or railroads to build and travel faster cross-country, without the machine gun, a more superior weapon, without new medicines, like quinine that treats malaria, it would not have been possible for these European nations to go take over areas of Africa and Asia, which is what Western European nations are going to do during imperialism. Some major natural resources that were desired: cotton, tea, diamonds, especially in South Africa where the diamonds were, the De Beers Diamond Company, gold, cash crops. All of these were designed to make a lot of money for the European countries. Britain in particular had eventually developed a policy of having colonies all the way from Cape Town in South Africa to Cairo in Egypt. And the diamonds in South Africa, the telegraph lines, the railroads, they really made that possible. In China was a little bit different than Africa and other parts of Asia, though, when it came to imperialism. China had spheres of influence, meaning it wasn't really divided up into colonies, but China was divided up into sections. And different European countries had certain sections, or what they called spheres of influence, that were economic areas of control and influence, meaning that these European countries were often the sole traders. They controlled economic policy. All right, moving into Unit 9. This is probably the longest unit we did this year. This includes World War I through World War II. World War I, of course, started after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The four main causes of World War I were, of course, militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. During World War I, the most visible image most people had was that of trench warfare on the Western Front. At the end of the war, though, the Treaty of Versailles was signed to officially end the war. And the terms, or the parts of that treaty, were especially harsh on Germany. Germany was forced to accept the blame for the war. This was the War Guilt Clause. They had to take total responsibility. Germany had to pay high reparations, meaning they had to pay for the damages that had been done during the war. Germany had to disarm and downsize their military, and Germany had to give up territory. Also, at the end of the war, connected to the Treaty of Versailles, was the mandate system. And the mandate system is a political concept that helped to change the maps. The two main empires that were involved on the losing side of World War I were the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Ottoman Empire, if you remember from earlier, was located in what is now modern-day Turkey in the Middle East, Arabia area. This empire was broken up in the Middle East. It was divided up into mandates that were controlled by Britain and France. In Europe, Turkey became independent. The country of Yugoslavia was formed. When the Austro-Hungarian Empire was divided up, it divided up along nationalist lines, the concept of self-determination of nations, that each individual nation or nationalist group could determine what their country would be. And for this reason, if you look at maps before World War I, where you have the two big empires, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, after the war, you see lots of smaller countries or territories where those two big empires used to be. Now, looking at the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution takes place, and it starts about halfway through World War I. And it will be responsible for Russia pulling out of World War I early and signing a separate peace with Germany. So the first part of the timeline is looking at causes, problems with the Russian monarchy and problems in the Russian economy. Let's start with the monarchy. The Tsar commanded the military. He was the head of the military, but he really had no experience, so he made really bad decisions. In many ways, the royal family was seen as out of touch with the people, and of course there's economic problems. The war is expensive. There's huge differences between the rich and the poor classes. So these economic problems are just making the royal family and the other nobility seem even more out of touch with the people. The Bolsheviks are going to be the ones who facilitate and start the Russian Revolution. They are led by Vladimir Lenin. They, of course, use their slogan of peace, land, and bread. They wanted peace, get out of the war, land of their own, and food. Eventually, the Bolsheviks will overthrow the Tsar, meaning they remove him from power, and eventually execute the entire Romanov family. That would be the royal family. While leader, Lenin did institute some new policies. One of them was called the New Economic Policy. The peasants of Russia under this policy were able to sell their extra crops, meaning they could make some extra money, and they also were able to privately own some businesses. He also renames Russia the Soviet Union, and the Bolsheviks are renamed the Communist Party. After Lenin dies, Joseph Stalin comes to power. And Stalin, like Lenin, is not particularly friendly to his opponents. Both of them had a tendency to either kill their opponents or put them in prison. But Stalin takes this to a whole nother level by killing and imprisoning all officials that he saw as not totally loyal to him. And that was called the Great Purge. Joseph Stalin's major policy was the 5-year plans. And there was actually a series of 5-year plans. The major goal was to rapidly build up industry within the Soviet Union in order to be prepared for any future wars. But he also decided to make collectives of the farms, basically take a bunch of smaller farms, combine them together, and turn them into factory-style farms. The industrialization of these 5-year plans will be the successful part. All right, let's look at the acts of aggression leading up to World War II before we look at World War II itself. We'll pick up World War II with the next video. All right, so acts of aggression. This will be military aggression. We're going to start with Mussolini invading Ethiopia. Mussolini, like Hitler, was a fascist leader, and he invades Ethiopia to basically try and take territory that he thought should be Italian. He wanted to share the land in Africa, and he was trying to provide jobs for his people, but most people who saw these reports just saw it as aggressive. The Spanish Civil War. This is what helped General Franco become the Spanish dictator. Hitler and Mussolini sent troops and weapons from Germany and Italy to help out. This allowed Germany and Italy to really test the weapons that they would then use in World War II. Germany, almost as soon as Hitler comes to power in the 1930s, starts to violate the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler orders the military rearmed, increases the size of the military. He sends the army in to occupy the Rhineland. This is territory between France and Germany. He annexes Austria, meaning he basically makes Austria a part of Germany, and then invades Czechoslovakia. Japan is also caught up in this military aggression leading up to World War II. Japan, ever since the Meiji Restoration, has become more imperialist, looking to take territory. Japan invades China in the early 1930s, and one of the major events during this invasion was the rape of Nanking. During this event, most of the men and boys in the town were killed, and the women and girls were raped or killed. This leads to a lot of criticism of Japan. The U.S. will embargo oil and steel, meaning the U.S. refuses to sell oil and steel to Japan. This criticism, this embargo, and the fact that the U.S. will be a threat in the Pacific will eventually lead to Japan attacking Pearl Harbor and beginning the war there. Now, despite all of this aggression, nobody still really wants to go to war. So Britain and France are using appeasement, meaning they're giving in to Hitler's demand for territory, trying to avoid going to war. This will not be successful. Hitler will keep taking territory, and it eventually does lead to war. All right, we will pick up the rest of World War II with the next video.